Hello and welcome, listeners, to the latest episode of the AdQuick Madvertising Podcast, a podcast at the intersection of culture, tech, media, all of the things that you care about. Today, we have a very special guest, personal friend of mine, Alex Wilhelm. He is the editor-in-chief of TechCrunch Plus, co-host of the Equity Podcast, an all-around great guy, an industry stalwart of tech and media. Everybody knows Alex already. He doesn't need more of an introduction than that. Alex, how are you today?
I've never been called the stalwart before. That's a brand new one. Everything else seemed pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I just find it really funny, and one of the best parts of getting older when you have friends over a long period of time. Like, Adam, how long have I known you?
We've known each other since my early days in San Francisco. You're no longer in San Francisco either, although you are still a predominant voice of the industry and many companies there. But we've been friends a very long time.
Very long time. I mean, I remember going to lunch at Google with you way before I even quit drinking. So that must have been like 2014. I mean, it's been ages. Anyways, yeah. It's fun to be on your show. Nice turn of events.
Thank you, Alex. And Chris is also a longtime tech industry nerd hailing from Chicago, now in Seattle. So between us all, we kind of have America covered in terms of location.
Yeah. I remember you back from when you're like Next Web, back, like you've been a part of my life for like a decade. So this is really cool to have you on.
Can we do a really quick digression on which city has worse weather? Because I have lived in Chicago and I have spent a lot of time in Seattle as a former Microsoft beat reporter. So, Chris, what's worse, Arctic snows or the Seattle lack of summer?
Well, we have now that we have global warming, we do get a summer here in Seattle, so it's actually the best place to be during the summertime. But I left Chicago and never went back because Arctic doesn't resonate with me.
No, not at all.
The last time I was in Seattle, it was like the weather was a copy paste of a nice day in San Francisco. So now I'm like mentally anchored to Seattle being gorgeous. And so when I go back next and it's rainy, I'm going to be like, God damn it.
Okay, but that's my entire impression of London. Every time I've been to London, it's been dark and raining, and I'm like, this has got to be the most depressing city in the world. Why didn't like heavy metal end up focused here? Why is it so Scandinavian when London should be the epicenter of like blackened death metal?
I don't know. Chris might know the answers to that one.
I mean, you get a lot of work done here. Let's just put it that way. So it's a good thing for me to be here.
All right, Alex. So we're going to get into it. We have a bunch of topics that I know you'll think are fun. I want to start with, around the economy. Obviously, everyone's thinking about that. And startups seem to be doing better again. But scale-ups and unicorns seem like they're in deep water. A recent column you wrote on the perils of staying private forever sort of goes into this. So do you want to riff on that column and sort of like the key takeaways for someone who might not be up to speed on what's happening?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to do this in kind of a nutshell format, and then you can pick up the parts you think are more interesting. But when we talk about startups, I think a mistake that we make is that we allow the term to become so stretched that companies from 2 people working out of a closet all the way up to multi-thousand person companies can be given that label. And so I think it's useful when you think about how startups are doing to kind of slice it up into different levels of maturity. So one way you can do this is to think about startups, aka early stage companies, your seed, your series A, series B, and then your scale ups, things that are more like the series C, D range. And then you have your super late stage unicorns, companies that, 15 years ago would have gone public, but have just been sitting around since then. And we pulled together some data. I think this was from Carta, if memory serves, essentially looking at a diverging set of results in the fundraising realm. And if you are raising a seed round today, it is harder than it was before, but we have seen the amount of capital available to them decline by less. So it's off by about half. But series A, B, and C rounds that Carta can see are off by about 80%. So it's better, not great. The other weird thing is that seed valuations are actually going up, whereas every other kind of valuation threshold and tranche in the startup world is much lower. So there's a weird imbalance between startups, which can raise capital and are doing better at a better price, and then kind of anything after that stage of private market growth, which is struggling quite a lot. And I think that's great news for seed founders and shit news for, can we swear?
100%.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, should have asked that before. And it's shit news for everyone else.
Oh man. So one of the other things is that I was curious about is like, when does the IPO window open back up? Is that something that you're getting exposure to? Do you have any insights there?
The rumblings have once again begun. Now, what I haven't had yet is my favorite type of phone call, which is when someone very senior at a company calls me up and says, "Hey, do you want some time with CEO X? It's a really good time for you to talk to them. You may not be able to talk to them in a couple of months." And that means they're about to go into their quiet period, essentially. And so, I mean, I think it's been long enough now I can just talk about this. But like before Instacart filed, right? Like I talked to them off the record, just like catching up, syncing up. I've covered that company since it was very, very small. Lovely to talk to the new CEO and kind of get a little bit of a rapport pre-IPO. So that hasn't happened yet for next year. But we do know that Reddit is back in the mix. We know that Shein, the Chinese clothing company, is in the mix. So I feel like we're starting to see the pop bubble. I mean, Chris, honestly, I hope the IPO window opens like, January 2nd. But I think more honestly, probably March to May. And if the labor market, oddly enough, gets a little bit worse and there's no concern that the Fed will raise rates more, that could provide a little bit of a boost, I think, to the timelines we're seeing.
Yeah, I think a couple of folks are saying that they expect rates to go down in the spring so they could get favorable voting outcomes. So
do you think that's going to happen, though? I feel like people are really thinking the Fed's going to be more reactive than it is. I mean, do you think Jay Powell really cares like what we think on Twitter? I think that guy's going to hold.
I'm sure Adam has a whole lot to say about that. What do you think, Adam?
You know what? I actually don't have too much of an opinion if the Fed goes higher or lower. I think they were putting room for themselves, obviously. But the only thing I'll say on this, because really our listeners who are marketers don't care too much, is I loved when Jerome went off script, didn't know he was on camera, and basically said to some people, "Close the door, get out." He had a heckler. And look, all that says to me is we're talking about like what Jerome's thinking. He's still a human. Yes. And I love seeing that. I think that disarmed a lot of people who really hated the Fed and are like, look, this regular guy looking at data, doing his job. It's not a big conspiracy. So that's my only Fed take I have right now. We're at like, what, 5%? Like, oh, they go up however many more basis points or go down. Like, I kind of don't care. And it seems to me like they've raised rates and things haven't broken. Right? Like the markets are now basically at all-time highs again. You can make whatever case you'd like for, are we in a recession? Are people struggling? That argument is always going to be ongoing, but it seems like a lot of the perma-bear arguments of, oh, if we raise rates, we're going to, go into some crazy period where everything starts breaking. It just didn't happen. So I think people and marketers, particularly listening to this, should breathe a sigh of relief.
Well, kind of. I mean, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of the macroeconomic environment and from my kind of narrow perspective on startup health, but one thing that does happen is as the economy slows down, the amount of money piling into different types of advertising. I know you guys are more focused on billboards and out in the world stuff, but I mean, just digital channels, et cetera, and all that other stuff does sometimes become less crowded and therefore possibly cheaper. So to me, there's a weird kind of like mix between, sure, you always want to have a hot economy, but do you guys remember how much it cost to buy Facebook ads back in 2021?
Yeah, I really think marketers should be looking for value bets wherever they can find them. So it's really a question of how much dry powder your team has or how much budget your team can negotiate during a tougher period to be able to be that much more ahead later on. And I think that speaks to the quality of a marketing team where they can get through the bad times.
There's a weird, like almost like anti-inverse approach to spend in a lot of cases. And this applies to, I think, both marketing and venture capital. When things are very, very expensive, everyone wants to buy more of them. And when things are cheap, people often pull back the amount of money they're investing or the money they're spending on marketing. And like, of course, you kind of get it. When your business slows down, you get to be more conservative. But there's a weird, like you almost wish you kept like a reserve around for when times got slower and things were cheaper and you could have more bang for your buck. And then you could do a lot more when prices were down. It never seems to work out that way. But every time I see a business cycle, I'm like, what? Why the fuck are we doing it this way? Why don't you just do it in reverse and then look like a genius?
Yeah. I mean, like Warren always said, buy when there's blood in the streets or something like that. So have a, spare tranche of cash ready to go.
In the world of billboards, what is the equivalent of blood in the streets? Legitimate question. I don't know the answer, so I'm honestly here to learn.
When there's blood in the streets, I mean, I guess, you know, the key metric for billboard operators, so the people that we service on our supply side, is typically, you know, their vacancy rate. So, you know, it's you know, our marketplace exists to keep them topped off, make sure that their inventory is always booked. So, I mean, we experienced our blood in the streets, Alex, in like March 2020, where we all got, you know, squirreled away into our homes, and nobody was allowed to go outside. And as one can reasonably expect, advertisers weren't spending a lot of money on outdoor. So,
and in terms of leading indicator of ads, Alex, the billboard ramp up preceded the rest of the economy. So I actually think advertisers were ahead of the game. Like, they made a bet that we weren't going to just stay indoors forever. So if you look at like the spend of digital out of home, for instance, in like any of like the industry reports, you'll see like it pretty quickly ramp back up.
Is that because certain forms of IRL advertising are particularly attractive to marketers that might be on the cutting edge of things? Or was that more of a general market posture amongst marketers in general to be ahead of economic improvement to ensure that they were well positioned in case that happened?
I think most recently, we had like, you know, our cohort of venture-backed startups arbitraging, you know, basically how expensive the ads were on the various you know, big platforms. And so once you've exhausted or saturated, you know, the performance of those networks, then, you know, the next best thing would be to go look at TV, go look at outdoor. Yeah, TV.
TV to me is just like, I mean, look, if you have enough money to do brand advertising on television, congratulations on your insurance business, you know?
Right. Insurance or pharma or whatever. They spend money in all climates.
Yeah, but I mean, for everyone else, I mean, you actually have to think about your cash flow and so forth. Yeah. You know, the thing about outdoor advertising that I think a lot about is just comes from my time in San Francisco. Like, how many trips to the airport did I take, and how much time did I see going down the 101 or the 280 and the billboards thereof? But the real story that kind of sticks with me about the hacking and trying to find the best price as it relates to that is what Brex did back in, Adam, help me out, 2018, I think, somewhere around there. 2019, when they bought up literally every single bus stop in the city for apparently like 2 nickels and like a handshake, and became ubiquitous around the city and got more brand recognition than any other company that I can recall faster, apart from like OpenAI, you know?
Yeah. Brex definitely put billboards on the map for the startup community. You know, they're clients of ours. They also do their rewards program through us. Fantastic folks. But yeah, I think they did a whole takeover, and the founders said it was like the best money they ever spent.
Yeah. But I mean, that's because people weren't thinking, I mean, even slightly outside the box. Like, they weren't like buying bus stops in like rural Bulgaria. This was in like Soma.
Alex, you know? This is why we exist, because in a pre-AdQuick world, you would have to get on the horn and physically call any number of vendors. And, you know, digital marketers like myself are admittedly, you know, I'd say a mix of lazy, but also wanting to be efficient, and also wanting a dashboard and tools to do things. So without that dashboard and tools, they're like, well, I could just spend on, you know, Facebook and Google and whatever online ad platforms. And we, you know, built a modern tool set so that you can run ads in the real world from anywhere. So I want to switch. Oh, do you have something else to say on this?
Yeah, I got questions about this. We can go back to your questions in a minute, but I have both of you now trapped. So now I can just squeeze you for information. What's the average term, like contract length for a billboard? Is there an industry standard, like 3 months, 6 months, or?
They're sold in 4-week tranches. They always go up on a Monday, get taken down on the Sunday. However, they're typically sold in 4-week increments. But however, you do see like quick service restaurants that are like trying to guide traffic off the freeway into their brick and mortar location. Those get bought up for like an entire year. And that's not uncommon. That's why you see like the same billboards in the same place for a very long time. Like in San Francisco, we had the Yahoo one, we had the Airbnb one, the Coca-Cola one. So those ones that have been around for that long are typically, you know, it's been proven that does what it's supposed to do, and impacts their metrics favorably, and so they'll book it out for like an entire year.
And then on the 4-week to, you know, whole year buyouts, what's the discount like on buying more than one traditional 4-week tranche at a time?
Depends on the given market, because it is a real estate play. So depending on the vacancy in market, if there's more more availability and there's a lot more to choose from, you'll get bigger breaks on longer term deals. Kind of like with everything else.
Okay, so that runs kind of like as I would expect it to. And then what's the average unoccupancy rate for billboards in like a state?
From last time we saw this figure, I think it was like last year, it was like high 20%. So
That's
there's
more than I thought.
Yeah, there's still a lot of work to be done. And it's just basically an information play, right? It's like you got to know who the players are in a given market, how to connect with them. So that's why we exist.
Yeah. So essentially, you guys are the central points. If I want to get space in several markets at once, I just go to you guys, give you guys money, and you guys do all the icky hard bits. You're essentially like an API for billboards.
Correct.
Yeah. So like imagine having to, back in the day, call 100 websites to place banner ads online, or you could just use the GDN and do it all with a few clicks and upload your creative to one place. So that's what we're solving for.
Yeah.
So
Alex, the origin story is all 4 of our founders were Instacart expansion team.
And they found that wherever they were running out of home was doing gangbusters more business because it's the only unskippable ad format. And it's the only one people organically share with their friends online. If it's creative, like you saw the recent Diablo ad in New York, that's a great one because everyone saw it. But that happens every day when people see quirky ads that meet their niche of the things they're interested in. So, the founders here were like, wait a minute, this is classic B2B startup inspiration. We're doing so much more business, but it's so hard to book that inventory. So that was like the nut.
Make that more efficient. No, I love that. Sadly, Diablo 4 wasn't that good of a game.
Well, who cares about that? The marketing was good. That's all we care about.
I paid $60 for it and I was disappointed.
This is not a advertiser's problem. We're telling people about it.
The advertising was great, I gotta admit. Yeah, it was just the game design. But now Microsoft owns that, so now we can blame Satya every time we don't like a Blizzard game.
Right.
Where's StarCraft 3, Satya? Come on.
Did that acquisition go through? Are we?
Yeah, Lulu took a victory lap on Twitter, so it's definitely done.
Yeah, I don't understand why that deal was allowed to happen. It was like, what, $69-70 billion? Like, who looked at Microsoft and thought, yeah, you know what? They're really just not quite big enough. I think they should be slightly larger. I think that's what this company needs, is access to even more IP and control of the gaming market.
The tech industry learned their lesson about having no presence in DC, and now Microsoft is well staffed with lobbying and staffers, so it's a whole new world.
Yeah, well, it's got the GDP of like, I don't know.
So this leads into my next question perfectly. We talked about this on a phone call the other week, Alex. We talked about startups, but in terms of big company rank and file sentiment right now, how is that going? Post all of these layoffs, there were Spotify layoffs last week. It seems like even though the market has recovered, a lot of people still have this like sort of unspoken anxiety. Have you heard a bit about this? Do you think it's going to calm down into the next year? What's really happening?
I do think we are past the large cuts at many big tech companies. One thing I think we can all agree on is that when an industry has a lot of money and is growing quickly, it spends too much. People get a little bit more acquisitive than they should. They overhire in anticipation of future growth. They want to lock talent in key areas down early. And that is so much fun for everybody until the music stops. And then the scissors come out and the fat starts to get trimmed and everyone gets very, very sad. From a very high level, everyone working at big tech companies is doing great. They're still paid well. They still get great stock options or grants with RSUs, whatever. The perks are still world class. And generally speaking, the work's not super onerous. Like, I have shoveled things for $8 an hour before. I've driven, farming equipment overnight for $8 an hour with no cab in the vehicles. I was just in the open. Like, that sucks. Working for Google may be soul sucking to some degree, or pick your major tech company that you're stuck in the middle of somewhere as a cog, but it's still pretty good work. I do think, though, the on way that you're describing, Adam, is still present because people are no longer confident. And one thing I think you've probably seen in your friend group of people who work at, what do we call it now? The Magnificent Seven or whatever the hell it is. They used to have a bit of swagger to them. Like, people be constantly trying to poach them. They'd be trying to get, even bigger comp packages. Now I think people are trying to play a little more defense with their careers. How am I doing internally? Not how do I look externally? So a bit of a turnaround there, but like, I'm never going to cry for $1 trillion companies and people that make more money than me on an hourly basis.
Yeah, totally. And I think one interesting thing I saw was that ex-engineer at Google who's been there like 18 years wrote this letter, and it's precisely the same letter that I saw people write at Google for years, because there's a cohort of people who were very early to certain tech companies where the company wasn't treated like a company. It was very much treated like this social experiment and very hippie. And now that all of these tech companies have become more mature, they're corporations. They're not, the tech industry is not just a scrappy, iconoclast, weird thing happening in Silicon Valley. It's very much corporate America now. And I think there's a lot of people who are still in denial with what that means. Alex, I'm like you. I've worked a day job since I was 15. I was making sandwiches in a deli growing up. So I don't feel bad for people when they're complaining about things, because, we all know everyone has to answer to market forces and everyone is so incredibly blessed in this sector. But I think that's where it comes from, is there is a big contingent of tech. And I think there's a lot of tension here when you see these comments online of people saying, kind of poking at the big company people aren't startup people anymore. That's really where the tension all comes from.
I think also tech companies don't scale well in human terms, because often a small group of dedicated smart people can do quite a lot and can move very quickly and build amazing things. And in a larger company, you spend a lot more time playing defense internally than offense. Like, how hard is it for me to spend money at Yahoo? Legitimately difficult. Why? We have lots of money. Our CEO keeps telling people that we're profitable and we're going to do like 5 billion in revenue this year. But one time I needed to replace some headphones for the podcast, and it was a war. And so you end up with companies that are almost like playing defense against their own staff versus trying to empower them, because once you reach a certain scale, it gets tough. But at a tech company, you're right. People expect something different, and then you get there and then the reality smacks you in the face. It's tough. The early days, though, I think are predicated on something special. And if you think back to Google, now Alphabet, when it was young, it had a amazing service that was just bringing in people by the bushel, and it had an enormous amount of white space to paint advertising into. And so it could have this amazing product that had so much consumer surplus and grow like the Dickens. So of course, at that time, they were like, we're different. We're iconoclastic. We're going to do a reverse Dutch auction IPO because fuck you. That's why. And now they're run by a McKinsey guy. So yeah, it's different, and it's not going to be fun, and you shouldn't go there.
Yeah, it's really,
unless you want to, then you should. But
it's really interesting because there's a little bit of a self-loathing with a lot of the engineers who work on things like ad tech, and then they publicly go online and hate on ads. And it's such a privileged take because ads fund so much of the information and news that we see on the internet, and they basically flatten out information. Not everyone can afford to pay for every service and every platform. And so ads are such a net good for the world. And I think there's just a contingent of tech that doesn't like that. And I think there's this perfect world scenario where everyone has subscription services, or somehow people are getting paid, but I still think ads are net positive for the internet. I know some people listening to this who aren't advertisers, because we do have some listeners just on the pure organic content side who like to listen to us. But
what up?
Yeah, I think that ads, even though we run offline ads, I think ads online are important too.
Okay, so I'm so glad we got here. So Chris, all right, imagine you're driving down the highway, right?
Right.
And there is a billboard every half mile on the right. Driving along straight, you're on I-5 or some shit, just cruising along. You see stuff. Right. Sometimes it's pertinent, sometimes it's not, but it's totally fine. Not too heavy, not too aggressive, useful, fine, a good balance between my attention and advertising. Now, double that ratio. Now there's one every quarter mile. Still, I'm going 60 miles an hour. I'm now seeing 4 per minute, probably starting to feel slightly heavy. Now double it again. Now add billboards that go over the road. Then start painting the road. And making me click on certain things and drive my car a certain way to get through the advertisements. This is the story that I keep seeing with digital advertisements on digital products. It starts off as a reasonable compromise, like Google search was, between product and advertisement. And over time, business demands more from the same bucket of user time. And so the ads creep and they creep. At first, it's YouTube ads you can't skip. Then it's 2 you can't skip, and then it's 2 that you can't skip, and 3 in the middle, and 1 at the end. And then they want you to interact to prove that you saw it. How about you fuck off, Farmers Insurance? So that's my beef. Adam's right.
Yeah.
But the density of advertisements and the juicing of digital properties for more incremental revenue, I think yields the hatred that we're seeing. If this was done at a less disgusting level, I don't think people would mind. But I ad block everything but TechCrunch.com.
I mean, there is nice, excellent. There is a future, and I mean, it's inevitable. Anything that has ad space will have ad space on it, or can accommodate ad space will have it on there. But for the most part, municipalities have been pretty good about minimizing the eye pollution. But I mean, there are different formats that have come to market. So people are like wrapping trucks. There's now amphibious billboards. Our clients want us to pull airplane banners in the sky. Like there are ads on fortune cookies, ads on pizza boxes, on coffee sleeves,
and Ubers.
Like, if
urinal ads.
We don't go to the bars as much as we used to. But
I know. I was about to say,
you can't skip those.
I mean,
I think there's probably a saturation point in real life anyway. There's like some limiting factor, but I don't disagree with what you said, Alex, of perhaps only focused on the quarter revenue team getting their fingers too far into product, because now you're not optimizing for the user, you're optimizing for the advertiser, and that can go too far. I think to what you say, Alex, that like those teams, at some point, it's not the same original team that built Google search. It's like this team that, was hired in and brought in, and, who gets promoted. It's based on politics. And ultimately, two things can happen. The experience can become so bad, it's an opportunity for someone else to build something better. Or in our case, we get OpenAI, which maybe a leapfrog search. I don't know. But the other thing that can happen is there can be backlash, and maybe these companies will be forced to wake up. There's probably an analogy to almost a reverse thing of the shrinkflation of getting perpetually less potato chips in a bag, and they see how far they can go. And it's like, at some point, like every company, and I say this as a marketer, every company needs to realize, well, why would you do things that would make your users hate you? You have the hard thing of having a globally recognized brand. Like, you should stop exploiting them. And I think if you really want to be upset, it's like there's no class taught in like the Harvard MBA school, or maybe it's skipped over, where they say, well, maybe there's a point where you don't just exploit what you can for additional incremental revenue, and you don't just answer to the latest quarter on Wall Street. And if you look at people like Jeff Bezos, when he's talking about plans for 10 years, they're not focusing on the quarter.
We need to stop giving Amazon so much credit. Do you know what they've done to every single thing they own?
They've done bad things too. That's true.
Like, okay, I'm going to tell you an example of why Amazon needs to get broken up into small pieces so it competes with somebody. I had a baby. So I've had a lot of time, not a lot of time for myself, but a lot of time doing stuff with the baby, including a lot of walks. So I have switched this year from print books to audiobooks, which means I have to use Audible, which is owned by, guess who? And I have spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on Audible credits this year, not just on the subscription, but I've bought extra credits often to keep powering through series. And every time I open up Audible, what loads first in the app on my phone? It tries to load the landing screen to show me an advertisement for a book it thinks that I want to read before it loads the thing I'm currently listening to. And it's just one of those little design choices that I have to live with because someone wanted their KPIs to be slightly better. And so I think when we approach building tech products the way we do in the current capitalist system, which I support because I'm a capitalist, we end up with products that get shittier over time because it never hurts Adam to pull out that next potato chip.
There's no user empathy there. And sorry, Alex, I agree. Amazon has done lots of bad things. I think what I meant by that is just the original vision of Bezos to like focus relentlessly on the customer and have this great, e-commerce experience. And I think the middle managers are the ones who do those annoying little things to try to hit their performance goals and meet the quarter. I think that's what's happening here.
I don't buy that because the fish rots from the head. And it's the CEO's job to use the product and to understand the consumer experience. An example of this was I read one of those like emails in tech from Bill Gates back in like the XP era. And he was trying to like install like Windows Movie Maker or something. And he was like, this is ridiculously hard. I am Bill fucking Gates, and I am struggling. What are the people doing with this? And you need that kind of feedback to advocate for the consumer. And I think that's the CEO should be at once leading the company's business goals, but ensuring that the culture of the product that consumers interact with doesn't go to hell. And I think advertising, because it is additive in terms of number of ads, frequency, and density in a digital world, not as much as Chris pointed out with municipalities and outside advertising, it's a place where there's almost an infinite amount of space to squeeze it in. And that's why I think we end up with whatever the hell Google search is today, which as far as I can tell is a miasma of self-hatred and depression.
Well, Alex, so you're speaking to, I think you're touching at the importance of founder-led companies. And a good example of that is Airbnb and their CEO looking at like all of the, fees that are not transparent and deciding, look, we need to redo a lot of this. And so I think, if I actually wonder why Zuck hasn't done like a sort of come to Jesus about Facebook and maybe decided to do certain things and take a machete to, like all of the different buttons and options and all the feature creep. Yeah, go ahead.
I just realized how much I've been talking about Google. You're a former employer, a company that I use every day. I'm on Chrome right now. Shout out Mountain View. Excellent company. Go America. Whoops. Sorry. I felt overly censorious towards that company when actually I think Amazon's marketplace is the ultimate example of how you can advertise a consumer experience to death. Sorry. So fuck Seattle is what I'm saying, not Mountain View.
It's a function of size as well. And one thing that maybe I think would be healthy for the tech ecosystem, it seems like the tech press is, they're not overly negative, just critical now, as they should be for a lot of things. But I think if we want a new generation of startups to, take some market share from the Magnificent Seven, hopefully the tech press can have some more optimism. You're not part of this, but there's other people who, no matter what they write about tech now, it's negative. And so I think like that's been another thing where I've seen like, it seemed like media and tech were in a little bit of a cold war, where there were certain areas where they were competing for attention, but it was kind of okay, everyone's going to still make peace. And it seems like since the acquisition of Twitter by Elon, it's become a little bit of a hot war to where, Elon is doing things like, flicking people off on calls, to sort of mark his territory and create a little bit of controversy. But now it does seem like there's a little bit of a push and a pull. And I think a lot of startups definitely have the sentiment, right or wrong, that the media industry, again, obviously not TechCrunch, but maybe the broader business media wouldn't always view tech as this like disastrous thing for society, because they've done good things as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think the thing that tech people don't get is what you said earlier, which is that this is no longer a scrappy startup in which people are going against the man. These are now the largest and wealthiest companies in the history of mankind, and they have enormous amounts of power, not only over what we consume, but how we consume it, not only where we go, but how we get there, not only what tools we use, but when we can use them, how we pay for them. Like they are so powerful. And what does journalism do on a good day? It uncovers bad behavior. And so, yes, there is going to be a need for journalism to be, I would say, contra power. And I think that tech people view that as a singular focus on their activities, which is a form of solipsism, but I will forgive it because it's the world they live in. So it's one they care about the most. But I do think it shows a lack of just general media literacy and what the job of the press is. And a lot of times the tech press has been too generous to tech in general. And so I think whenever we do ask a question that they don't want to answer, they're like, well, why are you hating? It's that like new online digital thing where like anyone who doesn't like you 100% is a hater and, seek your own truth, whatever. The media has never been, I think, less impactful.
Oh, interesting.
Like we're not.
That's an interesting take.
Can I rephrase that? That's not quite what I meant.
I think you're wrong. I think the media is as impactful as ever. And they're doing things both good and bad. As we see the current geopolitics play out, there's, I would say, with my bias on, there's a lot of good and a lot of bad reporting. But I would say the media is still powerful. The fact that even the people who like hate, for example, either Fox News or the New York Times, they still reference those discussions on social in their profiles. So I think all of the media doesn't matter takes are wrong. The media absolutely matters, or we wouldn't even be talking about them. I think what's happening is people are so ingrained in their media bubbles, and so they want to talk about those takes. So I think the media is feeding the animal of social, and they kind of exist together.
Are you putting the New York Times on the other end of a political spectrum where Fox News is the other anchor point? Because oh my God,
it was the first. It was just the first thing I thought of.
We'll talk about that offline. But okay. I'm not going to start talking about how we report on individual Palestinian deaths on this podcast because I don't want to end up there.
It was the first thing that came. It was the first thing that came to mind. Who would be the left? Who would be
Raw
the left
Story, Salon, like like the far.
Like okay, we're going that far.
Incendiary elements of.
I don't have the media chart. I don't have the media chart in front of me.
Well, we need the media charts are designed for dipshits to confuse morons into thinking that all media is monolithic. But the New York Times actually has thousands of journalists around the world doing a whip-ass job of covering hard things, and they do make some mistakes. But you know what? Unlike politicians and companies, the New York Times will analyze itself, apologize, correct, tell people what it's going to change, and then move forward. Fox doesn't do that.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think the New York Times did get a bit wrong with their, quick reporting of what was happening. I think they have.
I know what story we're talking about.
Yeah. I just don't think
of the barrage of stories that the Times has covered since October 7th. That we should say, well, they fucked up that one, and therefore we should write them off. And I'll just say this, the people that often say that are the same people that parrot one particular side of the military conflict, and those talking points ad nauseum without anything approaching an understanding of how those are being shaped. So I think that what we should do is we should let journalists who are trying so hard to get it right, maybe a small bit of wiggle room to make a mistake here and there, and not treat it as evidence of bias against our team, as Adam pointed out earlier, because we are now sufficiently tribalized that now everything is essentially a talking point as opposed to something that's an honest bit of reporting or a mistake thereof.
Sure. And I'm not disagreeing with you on, my take of the Times being far left in relation to Fox News. But I'm telling you, if you were to ask a lot of people, they would probably bring those up as just the two major sources of the left and of the right. Not the best, but probably the two major sources from both those groups. You don't think?
No. Well, I don't think Fox News is a journalistic organization.
Well,
and critically, I don't think that the New York Times can be construed as far left. It's completely and entirely in abeyance to power. And if you want to go back and kind of vet the New York Times and its coverage, go back to the Iraq War period, the pre-Iraq War period, and look at how the Times covered that particular moment in America and how it failed to provide anything approaching, I would say, a stiff-backed response to a relatively impressive amount of patriotic propaganda from the U.S. government. And look where that got us. So I think people often mistake things along political lines when they're really mistaking the actual biases, which is in favor of power. And I do think media in general struggles with that.
So one thing that I actually take into account more and more when I read news personally is the person who wrote it. It is almost even more important to me than the media brand, because people change publications. And I tend to know the people and their personal politics fairly well and how they interpret things. And so I read Joe Weisenthal at Bloomberg quite a bit, and I know how he thinks about things. So now when I'm reading a story and his opinion, I'm like, he wrote it this way because here's how he sees the world, right? And that's important for me, so that way I can understand, what I want, like how I actually want to take that. And I think I don't think it's a bad thing. I think the internet has made this good because now these people are accessible. And Alex, I can read your tweets about any number of subjects and be like, oh, Alex knows what he's talking about. He's super smart and he's also a nice guy. So I want to read him. Right. So I even have that parasocial relationship with you. I have a social relationship, but other people who don't know you could also have a parasocial relationship. So
sure. But I think it's very interesting that the two people you've picked out to bring up as examples are Joe and myself, because both of us are in a very serious way reporters, yes, but also more frequently analysts and columnists.
Well, as a marketer, I follow analysts. I need to understand what people are predicting about the future so I can make bets. So
absolutely. But name for me the 5 Bloomberg reporters who are currently on the heavy metals desk, who are looking at like copper spot prices.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. I'm an advertiser. I'm just talking about advertisers here, not
my
like
point
serious
is,
news.
when you talk about individuals versus publications, I do agree that it's a very important distinction when you think about people that do more opinion-y stuff. But when it comes to the rank and file of people who are writing and filing copy for Reuters and Bloomberg, the Journal of the Times, I mean, they are following a lot of in-house rules. I have the Bloomberg Way on my desk behind me somewhere. It's somewhere over there. And they have a system and a method. And so I think for folks that are more in the hardcore newsrooms and stay in that particular remit, the publication should matter quite a lot more than the individual writer because they have been edited to hell.
Yeah, I think one thing that publications, and I wrote a blog post on this, and this is like a hard thing to do, is the more I feel like, and I'm not going to name any specific publication, but like the more a site runs on clickbait and publishes low quality, fast, cheap, stories, and great sites don't do this, but the more a site does this, or blog, I think the less trust they have when they have a serious publication. BuzzFeed doesn't really exist anymore. So it seems like that's a bad model. And the publications that double down on real reporting, or the publications that double down on tabloids, like maybe a Barstool or whatever, like maybe those things, like it's hard to intermingle those from like a brand trust standpoint.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like I was a subscriber and I paid for BuzzFeed News, even though I didn't get anything for giving them $5 a month. But the BuzzFeed News team was fantastic. But they had to constantly deal with people going, "Oh, BuzzFeed, the list site," and they had to earn credibility, I think, twice, not only through the reporting but also against their main brand. But Chris, how would you define clickbait? I have a response to this. So,
flashy article designed to sell advertising.
Clickbait is defined as anything someone doesn't like.
Oh wow.
Because every time I'm reading like games journalism, they're like, "Oh, look at this clickbait." I'm like, you just don't agree. You just don't like it. That's what clickbait means. Like people are like, "Oh, they just want to get clicks." And then in the next thing they'll be like, "And also journalism's dying." I'm like, don't you see how those are contradictory views? No offense to like the ad market out there for online media, but it's not exactly blowing up right now. I mean, so people are like, "Oh, just for the clicks." I'm like, what? For the 7 cents? Congratulations. Good job.
Good point. Very, very valid point. So, I'd love to get us. So most of our audience are marketers or founders. Can you kind of share some insights into like what's evolved in terms of like public relations and how outlets such as your own and like, interact with marketers at advertisers or marketers at large corporations?
So most of my experience with broader marketing and comms team is definitely on the comms side. So I have honestly very little overlap with actually I have no overlap with people that buy ads on TechCrunch, for example.
Right.
We recently had a problem which we were covering Brex on the podcast. And then my co-host Marianne was like, "You do remember that Brex is the current sponsor of the show?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" So I had to like give a caveat, like, "Yes, I know Brex is the sponsor of the show today, but it had no impact on my editorial decisions." So the marketing side, I'm a little bit far away from by design,
Right.
but I do spend a lot of time talking to folks in the broader comms industry. And the way my relationship with that has changed is I've just become selfish in my own communications channels. So I don't read email, pretty much full stop. And that is unpopular both internally and externally. But what I have found is that the folks who I would like to speak with have my cell phone number and text me and I answer or not. But I've had to find a way to carve out a little bit of calm, digital calm, I guess, because I have so many internal systems I have to respond to. Like, I don't know, Adam, do you guys use Slack at AdQuick?
We do use Slack.
Yeah. And how many Slacks do you get a day?
It depends on the day, but probably a lot.
Yeah, a lot. And you know what people expect with Slack? They expect you to get back to them now. And so, it's
an async tool. So hopefully if you are a startup listening, don't feel like you have to respond right away to every Slack, unless you're in customer service or something like that.
Or you're in a newsroom where people are very, in a hurry. But I find that there's a lot of great people in the comms industry, and they're trying to find a way to get the name of their company out there. And they tend to be, at least people that I work with, smart, engaged, and doing their best. The struggle is there's so many more companies in the areas that I cover, startups, then there are people covering that area, and there are stories that touch on those industries. So I just think there's a big demand supply imbalance, or maybe that's the other way around. And so it's a struggle out there, and it's tough. And that's why I think we've seen so many companies pursue their own kind of like in-house strategies, having their own blogs, publications, SEO strategies. And then the other thing is a lot more media today than before is behind a paywall. And so I do think that limits the impact for people thinking through a marketing lens of coverage, because now if Bloomberg covers you, everyone's going to go click on that and see the first 3 words, and then it's going to fade out and be like, give us your credit card. 10 years ago, I don't think that was the case. And so I think that the prize target of getting covered by publication X, right, probably doesn't have the same impact that it did 10 years ago, just because the relationship between publications and readers has changed so dramatically.
Yeah, I think companies tend to use that coverage as a proof point. Like, look, I was covered in Business Insider, or I was covered in TechCrunch, and it's helped solidify to the buyer this is a legitimate entity. So, well, Alex, we've got about 10 minutes left. Can we do lightning round? Will that
yes.
annoy you?
No. Oh my God, Adam, I'm here for literally anything you want. If you want me to do a dance or sing you a song, I'm up for it.
I mean, Chris, I don't know
Please don't.
We don't have an AdQuick song, so
the guitars are right there.
Oh, well, if you can break out some G sharp F minor for me, I can fail a tune.
I actually have a harmonica. No, we won't keep you forever. We'll just do a fun lightning round of a few things. Right. So, you could just give your take, long or short, as you want. What do you think of the accelerate movement, the EAC movement, that is the younglings are trying to move AI faster? Do you think they're right? Do you think they're wrong? Are you more of a doomer? Where are you on that discussion?
Yeah. So, well, the only thing I would change in the way you asked that is I don't think it's the younglings. In fact,
it's not all the younglings.
Oh, well,
it's a lot of younglings.
Who was the high priest?
Did you go to Beth Jesus and Sam Altman or high priest? But if you went to they threw a rave, and you're right, it's a mix of people. A lot of younglings.
They threw a rave? I cannot imagine a rave I'd like to go to less than that.
I think at I forget the venue. We've both been there in San Francisco, but yeah, they had a rave where Grimes spun, and Beth Jesus was there, and they had all the OpenAI people and all the other AI adjacent people. But anyway,
so EAC, which is effective accelerationism, which is a twist on effective altruism, which is now I think a broadly discredited approach of, look, we're going to make a lot of money and then we'll help other people. Sam Bankman-Fried was a big proponent of that. EAC, or effective accelerationism, is essentially, look, we need to go quickly, and if we stay slow, we're going to harm humanity more than we will help it by being more cautious. If they're going back to Adam's continuum setup, if doomers are at one end and decels are like 30% past midpoint towards the doomers, I'm nearly all the way over with the EAC people. Like, I'm a big fan of technology.
That's why Alex is based.
I mean, I'm just being honest. I'm a big fan of capitalism. You know what I fucking love? The fact that I'm sitting here in Providence, Rhode Island, in my backyard shed with gigabit internet over Wi-Fi, and we're having a great chat with the three of us all across this beautiful country. That's amazing.
And you don't have
fuck on.
And you don't have to deal with all the George Washington traffic, right?
So yeah, what Chris is referring to there is the fact that there's a major artery in Providence, and it turns out that bridge was about to fall down, so they closed it, and then the whole state is in chaos. It's a local story that makes us look silly at the national level, but we're only so big. We only have like 5 bridges, so if one of them breaks, it's a big damn deal. And yeah, so let's go faster. Let's do it.
Awesome. So I don't even need to ask your take on the EMEA AI regulation, because you just said your answer.
So interesting point though, because there is discontent, there is fomentation amongst the French when regards to the EU. And if you don't know why, just look up Mistral AI. Mistral, of course, is the name of a famous wind that goes through Provence and lots of France towards the Mediterranean. But Mistral is essentially the European Union's attempt at a local AI champion. Because what the EU doesn't want is another 20 years in which Americans make all the tech and make all the money, and then the EU occasionally finds us and goes, bad kids, do better. Like, who wants to just be the nanny, right? So that's what's going on. I do think that people are misconstruing how quickly the EU AI regs go into place. There's a phased timeline, and I'm not even quite sure exactly how much they're going to have as an impact. But I will say that all the Americans think that the EU is being stupid. So we'll see. But we are going to get a natural experiment because we have the Chinese market, which is a hermetically sealed digital ecosystem with rules that are governed not only from a top-down command and style economy and political structure, but also very much married to socialism with Chinese characteristics. Then you have the EU, which is a middle income bloc in which they're trying to find a way to balance caring for people and also doing technology. And then there's America, the land of Texas. Yeehaw, motherfuckers. So yeah, we'll see. Actually, can you bleep that out? That's probably slightly too much. I don't know. Maybe that's not.
Yeah.
I keep forgetting that I'm not just talking to Adam and Chris, that we're actually doing a podcast. This is a dangerous show.
That's why you're on the show, because
ratings are going to be through the roof. We're good.
All right. If I offended you by accident, by the way, adam.singer@adquick.com is where you should send all of your notes.
Send me notes.
And Adam at AdQuick. That one works too.
I put my email signature in all of the emails to our users. So I even encourage people to send me questions just about life and anything else. So I'm happy to help.
He puts his phone number in the newsletter. He gets phone calls.
Wow. Well, I have 4 more minutes, Adam. So let's blast through these. Let's do
awesome. I had a bunch more questions, Alex, but if we just have 4 more minutes, I would love to hear just your take on any cool trends for the next year, whether tech, whether creative, whether fashion, just because we have an advertiser audience. What do you think 2024 brings? Even if not specific trends, just vibes. What do you think happens?
Oh, man, that is such an amazing question. That's kind of like look ahead. And when you see the future, what stands out to you? I'm going to spitball here for a second and see what sticks. I'm super excited about the creative world. I do think that the creator economy push, which was essentially an effort by some capitalists to astroturf a way to take a bigger vig off of art, failed. But I do think that the digital tool ecosystem that we have through distribution and new ways of monetization is very exciting. A lot of bands that I like that are smaller and in the heavy metal genres, for example, are pursuing not only touring, recording, and merch, but also Patreons, video games, and other ways to monetize. A rapper that I like is doing cigars and coffee as part of his thing because Spotify doesn't make a lot of money. And I know Adam has a lot of views on Spotify. I think the macroeconomic world is going to be kind of okay next year. I think there's a lot of weakness in certain parts, but I do think that the great engine of capitalism is going to keep churning along. And I don't think we're going to see a major recession in the US. We might have a quarter off if we don't see a rate cut in the next 6 to 9 months. But hey, it won't be a big deal. I will say that the thing that keeps me up at night is rising fascism around the world. I'm very peevish with certain elements of the American political system that wants to stop sending our spare parts to Ukraine to fend off the Russians, if you will. That's really disappointing to me. I'll just say, even though I'm an anti-theist, I'll say a short prayer for everyone in the Middle East towards a quick resolution and peace, so that way everyone can be safe and get back to doing cool things. One thing that I've had a real joy of is meeting so many Israeli entrepreneurs in the last couple of years. There's so many cool companies that are coming out of there, except for in cybersecurity. But hey, that's a different story. What else, man? I mean, I'm going to try to have a second kid next year. So that's kind of high on my radar. Yeah. And I hope that we all get along slightly better. We've all traveled, right? And when you go to a new place, what do you find? A bunch of people. The food's slightly different. The housing setup is slightly different. The toilets are slightly different. The customs about shoes slightly different, but really it's just people. They want some stability. They want to have some kids and they want to have some fun and make some money. I mean, like, it's the same everywhere. And so I hope that we can somehow turn the internet around and get back to getting along and being friends again, because everywhere that I've gone, folks have been fantastic. And I find it shocking that we're so unable as a species to stop clawing at one another instead of trying to claw our way into low Earth orbit, the moon, Mars, and then hopefully somewhere else.
That is a wonderful note to end the podcast. I think Chris, myself, and the entire team that works with us would agree with everything Alex just said. So everyone have a wonderful holiday and New Year, depending when you listen to this. Yes. Unless we decided to publish this too far into the New Year, which wouldn't be the case. It's going to come out around that time. I'm still doing the YouTuber thing. So if you are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe in the comment section. And for everyone who's listening, thank you for being with us another episode. We hit some cool milestones and downloads the last week. So we appreciate all of you being a part of this journey. And we will see you next week.